On today's episode, we find out what we're going to do when Sheriff John Brown comes for us. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Anxiety Monkeys podcast. I'm your host, Rob, and joining me here in the studio is my co-host, Michelle.
Good morning, everyone. What a lovely day it is.
Yes, it is. So, for today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about reality television. It's no secret that I don't like reality TV in general. I prefer scripted entertainment. I prefer a good storyline. I prefer character development. And arguably, you could say that you see some of that stuff on reality TV, but I think my disdain for it stems from, the contrived situations that we see. I don't know if my objection springs from a case of being what's in a name. Like I said, we call it reality TV, but it's a very skewed view of what reality actually is.
And it just seems like more script than reality. And there's just so much drama involved in it. And it's driven by it. It just seems so out there.
Yeah, the situations don't seem particularly realistic. And as you pointed out, some of it seems kind of scripted behind the scenes without them admitting, hey, we're actually scripting this. So I don't know. I don't know what it is that sets my hair on end about it.
I mean, for example, even when the Osbournes did it with their show, it was so out there and it just seemed so forced.
Yeah, Ozzy was kind of a larger than life figure, back when he was focusing on his music. The stories that have been told about him make him kind of a rock and roll legend. So, there's definitely some truth to the stuff that he did before his family got into doing reality television. And I kind of feel like we're beating a dead horse here because the Osbournes haven't been on TV in at least 10 years, maybe longer.
Well, I was using it as an example.
Sure,
for
absolutely.
A common ground example, because I know we've both seen. And
no, we haven't.
I thought we have.
No, you have. I never saw an episode. I think I saw snippets of an episode, but I've never actually seen a full episode. So, but your point still stands. Anyway, I guess you could say reality television has always been with us, with shows like Queen for a Day and Candid Camera and a lot of these older TV shows that have retroactively been branded as reality television. But I think, for the most part, these weren't reality television in the way that we know it, so much as it was people experimenting with a new medium. But what they did do in a lot of these shows is introduce some of the tropes that would come back with a vengeance. One of the arguments around television, and to a lesser extent movies in Hollywood in general, is that there really aren't much in the way of new ideas. They just recycle the same shit and feed it to us, on some sort of cyclic nature. But in my opinion, the first reality television show, the first real one that we could call reality television, was Cops. Cops debuted in 1989 in response to a need for programming in the wake of a writer's strike in 1988. And this is a theme that's going to come back again, later on in time. My problem with Cops, my problems with Cops, there are several. One is that Cops was one-sided. They seem to focus on people of color. They seem to focus on people living in poverty. You never saw an episode of Cops with the SEC, busting Wall Street criminals or anything like that. It was always, busting people in trailer parks or, shitty rundown apartment complexes. You pretty much never saw them busting middle-class white people.
No, don't take him, Roy. I loves him.
Yeah, exactly. It reinforces some of the worst stereotypes about, living in poverty or being a person of color in America. Of course, they seem to manage to never show, major incidents of police brutality. So they're also kind of whitewashing the police, even as they're, making other people look bad or, how do I explain it? Like I said earlier, they're reinforcing all these negative stereotypes about people, who we share our society with.
They're trying to make the cops look better than they are.
Yeah, they're trying to make the cops look better, and they're trying to make the people that the cops are, harassing look worse. The good news is that Cops was canceled in 2020, right around the same time Minneapolis was actually trying to cancel their cops in real life. It's only about 31 years later than it should have been canceled, but, these days we take a win where we can find it, I guess.
Yep.
So, rest in peace, cops. You will not be missed.
What's even more interesting is that you never witnessed police brutality to the extent that we see it today on cops.
Yeah,
because of the filming. And yet, here we are with body cams, and what are we hearing more about?
Well, there's a couple of different things at play there. One being that, the camera crews, the people who produce and direct cops, they have to carefully curate their footage. Earlier, I said that it was one-sided by necessity, and that necessity being access. You can't have a show where you tag along with the police and, see what they're doing if you're showing what they're actually doing.
But it seems like the producers would be obligated to actually report the truth if
No.
they witness brutality.
If we were talking journalistic ethics, sure. But there's no obligation for them to report on anything with any sort of accuracy or to reflect reality. Again, this is one of those things that bothers me about reality television is that we call it reality and then we skew it just as heavily as we can to show a narrative that's crafted behind the scenes. It's not reality. Maybe it's Maybelline. I don't know what it is, but like I said, it's definitely not reality. The other thing that kind of occurs to me is that, Cops was canceled in the wake of things like the George Floyd murder and the murder of Breonna Taylor. 2020 was kind of a banner year for police brutality incidents, despite there being a frickin' lockdown. But, despite like everything else going on, it seems like it was a banner year for cops killing people. And I don't know if statistically the number of killings increased or if we're finally like starting to wake up and pay attention, because the argument in the wake of the Rodney King beating was that, video cameras are everywhere now. Everybody's got a video camera. This stuff's going to come to light more. And I think that prediction was maybe 20 years ahead of its time. Cameras back then were expensive. They were bulky. You had to have videotapes. You had to have charged batteries. There were a lot of arguments for why that prediction didn't exactly pan out.
And now everybody's got a video camera pretty much at the tips of their fingers.
Oh yeah, nobody leaves home without their video camera anymore. It's in our pockets. And more than that, it's not just that we have video cameras in our pockets at all times now. The other thing to consider was that back in the 90s, if you recorded footage of cops tooling up on somebody, you had to get it to a TV network, and they had to give a shit enough in order to distribute it to the public at large. Now, you can take the video that you recorded of cops being shitheads, put it up on Facebook, put it up on YouTube. We have more control. Like Jello Biafra was talking about. This is one of those tools that really does allow us to become the media. Mm-hmm. And there's definitely some arguments, like a discussion we should have as a society about the role that these social media companies, that these media platforms have in our society, questions of censorship and things like that. And this isn't me agreeing with the right-wing douchebags who've been kicked off of Twitter, who've been kicked off of Facebook or YouTube, but there is kind of a precedent that they're starting to set that we may need to look at, because it is a slippery slope argument, but they're not necessarily wrong. Even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it kind of amazes me, getting back to the point, that it took this much effort, that it took this much stuff going sideways in order for cops to get canceled. But, you raised another point about police body cams, and that's something we really need to improve upon. It's a good idea, but it's only as good as the implementation. We're starting to see some examples of cops not knowing how the technology works, And in that case, it's kind of working out in our favor.
Or for that matter, and I apologize for interrupting you, or for that matter, cops knowing how the technology works and preventing the camera from actually filming anything.
Right, it's a double-sided coin because on the one hand, the camera doesn't do any good if it's not on. But there was one police shooting, and the name of the fellow they shot escapes me, and I apologize for that. But they had their cameras off when they shot him, but apparently the camera automatically records like 60 seconds of footage prior to a gunshot going off. Like, I think it's kind of running in the background, and when it records a gunshot, it stores the previous 60 seconds. I'm not thoroughly sure how that works, but I do know that they have footage they didn't think they were going to have, that paints them in a very bad light. It shows them shooting a guy who appeared to be reaching, like he had his cell phone out, and they shot him, So, again, I like the promise of the technology, but I don't think the technology's there yet. And once again, on that cheerful note, folks, we're going to take a quick ad break. We'll be back in a moment. Today's episode is brought to you by Pages Printed Plastics. You can visit us at pagesprintedplastics.com. That's PAIGES printedplastics.com. We have a couple of different printers. We can do design as well as print. We can print anything from small figures like D&D miniatures to larger objects like computer parts, toys, props, pretty much anything you can imagine. So feel free to check us out. Again, that's pagesprintedplastics.com. Okay, and we're back. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was another strike, and I can't seem to find any details on this, but this was the driving cause behind reality television becoming the juggernaut that it has in American television. The two big drivers behind that were Survivor and American Idol. Now, I never saw an episode of Survivor, but I think it's one of those cultural phenomenon that you can kind of absorb by osmosis. It was everywhere. And my main takeaway from Survivor was that it seemed to just absolutely reward the worst in human behavior. I don't think anybody on the show committed an actual genocide, but there was nobody that I could see myself hanging out and having a beer with. What about you, Michelle? Did you ever catch an episode of Survivor?
No, but from what I did see of the show, it did seem to bring out the worst in humanity. And tied to that would be like Bachelor, Bachelorette, and everything else. And MTV's throw into reality.
Oh, God, Road Rules. And what was that other one that they had?
Teen Mom and
16 and Pregnant.
Yeah.
Ugh.
I mean, we knew somebody that actually was addicted to those shows. I remember this person being in our home and actually, always watching these shows. And
oh, right, she would watch them while I was at work and stuff.
And she would just not miss an episode.
Ugh. The other show that I mentioned was American Idol. Now, that one I actually did catch a couple of episodes of early on. And my takeaway from that was that these kids were really talented. I think I was maybe a couple of years too old and severely not talented enough to actually be on the show. But, those kids seem to have a lot of talent, even if the music wasn't really to my taste. But my main takeaway from that show was that it seemed like it basically put Simon Cowell more in the public eye here in the United States. Apparently he's some hot shit, mucky muck in Great Britain at the time. But, he really took off here in the States. And this speaks more to the audience, I think, than it does to anything else, because Simon Cowell is a fucking dork. It takes a lot of balls to, dunk on 17-year-olds and crush their dreams, for the sake of ratings. I'm not impressed.
No, not impressed at all with Simon Cowell's interpretation or taste of wanting to crush teenagers and just rob them of any hope.
Yeah, So I guess the question is there anything in reality television that was actually like worth watching in your opinion?
Well, the only thing that I could even remotely get behind would be like where they would take the old stuff to these shows and have it appraised, and you would find out little interesting bits of history about these pieces.
So you're talking like Antiques Roadshow?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. Not really my cup of tea. I think there's better sources out there for historical television if that's your bag.
And then also you got Martin Marvels and, I can't think of the name. I'm sure you can't call Mythbusters a reality show, but it was reality in a sense.
Yeah, it's a reality I would have loved to have lived. Get paid to blow stuff up and talk about science. I could get behind that. But yeah, I don't think it was reality television in any way that reality television is classified. Another one that seemed like it had some promise was Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe. Too bad he turned out to be such a fucking douchebag.
I know.
Oh, Jesus. A guy with a communications degree who's never really done any real work in his life, trying to appeal to the working class and tell us how, this country should be run. Get the fuck out of here. Well, folks, I think that's going to do it for us this week. We don't really have much else to say. You can find us on most of the major podcast markets, and if you review us and give us 5 stars, that will help other people find us. We're on Twitter at Anxietymonkies, Facebook at facebook.com/anxietymonkeys, and you can email us at anxietymonkeys@gmail.com. Finally, if you've got a couple of bucks you want to throw our way, you can do that at patreon.com/anxietymonkeys, or go in for a one-time donation at paypal.me/anxietymonkeys. Our theme music was composed by Joel Gerhardsen and is used with his permission. Our show notes will have a link to his website if you'd like to check him out. Until next week, she's Michelle, I'm Rob, and we're your Anxiety Monkeys.
Have a good week, everyone.